Ananya Kapoor, the stunning young bride who once dazzled high society with her charm, would soon be unmasked as a master manipulator, leaving behind a trail of dead husbands and shattered families, while David Reynolds, Michael Turner, and Richard Hayes became unwilling pawns in her deadly game of love, greed, and revenge. Ananya Kapoor arrived in America with dreams that sparkled brighter than the city lights of New York. To her family back in India, she was the picture of success, a young woman who had crossed oceans to find opportunities and a better future. But beneath her graceful smile and soft-spoken demeanor was a calculated determination that few could see. She had learned early in life that beauty and charm could open doors, that education or hard work might not. And she was prepared to use both to build the life she wanted. Her first introduction to high society came quickly. Through community gatherings and social networks, she met wealthy men who were captivated by her elegance and the aura of innocence she carried. It was during a fundraiser dinner in Dallas where she first caught the attention of Michael Turner, a recently divorced businessman known for his quick decisions and reckless spending. He saw in Ananya not just beauty, but also a sense of purity that reminded him of a life he longed to rebuild. What he didn't realize was that Ananya had already identified him as a potential target the moment their eyes met. Michael was lonely, vulnerable, and eager to love again. For Ananya, he was the perfect starting point. She played the role of a devoted partner with remarkable skill, learning his habits, listening to his fears, and shaping herself into the image of the woman he believed he needed. Within weeks, she was being introduced to his circle of friends and even his teenage daughter, who found her charming and kind. But behind her carefully crafted persona, Ananya kept track of every asset, every bank account, and every weakness she could exploit. The marriage came swiftly, less than a year after their first meeting. It was celebrated with grandeur, a blend of Indian traditions and Western luxury that impressed Michael's family and colleagues. To everyone around them, it seemed like the perfect union of two people who had found love after heartbreak. But Ananya knew the truth. The wedding was not the beginning of a new life, but the countdown to the moment she would secure her financial freedom. Michael, blinded by affection, overlooked the subtle changes in her behavior after the marriage. She began encouraging him to sign over investments, convincing him to start businesses in her name, always under the guise of building a secure future together. Within months, large sums of money were moving from his accounts to hers, disguised as mutual projects and joint ventures. When Michael finally began to sense something was wrong, it was too late. His finances had been drained, his assets tied up in ventures he didn't understand, and his trust deeply betrayed. The confrontation between them was quiet but tense, and though he threatened to expose her, Ananya had already set her exit in motion. Days later, Michael Turner was found dead, under circumstances that shocked everyone. The police labeled it as a sudden accident, but whispers began to circulate. Ananya, dressed in mourning, played the grieving widow with convincing sorrow, even as she carefully planned her next move. After Michael Turner's death, Ananya Kapoor carefully reinvented herself once again. To outsiders, she was a grieving young widow who had suffered a tragic loss far too early in her marriage. She attended charity events in black gowns, spoke softly about resilience and healing, and played the role of a woman trying to move forward despite unbearable pain. What no one saw was that behind her veil of sorrow, she was already searching for her next opportunity. She had perfected the art of manipulation, and her grief-stricken widow image made her appear even more desirable to wealthy men who admired her supposed strength. It was at a private gala in Los Angeles where Ananya met David Reynolds, a tech entrepreneur whose fortune had skyrocketed after he sold his software company. David was known for his confidence and intellect, but also for his vulnerability in relationships, having been divorced twice. He was the kind of man who craved stability and companionship, but often made impulsive decisions when it came to love. Ananya saw through him within minutes. She recognized the same cracks she had exploited in Michael. Loneliness, the desire for trust, and the need to believe in someone who could balance his chaotic lifestyle. Unlike Michael, David was more skeptical. He had been hurt before and was cautious about women who seemed to perfect. Ananya understood this, so she altered her approach. Instead of being overly affectionate, she played the role of someone hesitant, almost reluctant, to open up. She spoke about her struggles, about how difficult it had been to lose her husband, and how she wasn't sure if she could love again. David, touched by her apparent vulnerability, felt drawn to her honesty. Slowly, his defenses began to lower. Over time, their bond deepened. Ananya made sure to keep control over the pace of the relationship, never rushing him, but always making herself indispensable in his life. She helped him organize his busy schedule, offered insights into his investments, and subtly positioned herself as someone who truly understood him. To David, she became the calm center in his storm. To Ananya, he was the next step in her carefully laid plan. The engagement came within a year, celebrated with media attention and lavish displays of wealth. Friends of David expressed their joy at seeing him happy again, while quietly questioning how quickly Ananya had become an integral part of his world. At the wedding, she looked every bit the radiant bride, glowing under the chandeliers, her hands adorned with diamonds David had gifted her. But while the crowd celebrated their union, Ananya's mind was focused on the wealth that had just become accessible to her. Her strategy with David was more elaborate than it had been with Michael. She convinced him to merge parts of his fortune into trusts and accounts where she had significant control, always under the guise of long-term financial security. Unlike before, she didn't drain everything too quickly. She played the long game, making sure her actions looked like wise financial decisions instead of suspicious withdrawals. But cracks began to show. David's business partners noticed irregularities, and his family grew wary of Ananya's influence. Rumors began spreading that she had manipulated Michael Turner before his death, though nothing concrete tied her to it. Still, David dismissed the concerns. He was in love, blinded by the idea that he had finally found someone who cared for him deeply. The illusion came crashing down when David was found dead in his penthouse, under circumstances eerily similar to Michael's demise. Once again, the police ruled it an accident, citing stress and overwork as contributing factors. Once again, Ananya stood by as the grieving widow, her tears convincing enough to silence most suspicions. And once again, her bank accounts had quietly swelled with millions she had redirected from her husband's fortune. After David Reynolds' sudden death, whispers began to grow louder around Ananya Kapoor. Two wealthy husbands gone in such a short span, both under strangely similar circumstances, was more than coincidence for many who were watching. But Ananya knew how to manipulate perception. She presented herself as cursed rather than cunning, a woman whose love life had been marred by tragic fate. The public sympathized, while behind the scenes, she was already plotting her next move. Her new target came in the form of Richard Hayes, a real estate tycoon in his late 50s. Unlike David or Michael, Richard was seasoned in both business and relationships. He had been widowed for nearly a decade and was known for his cautious nature. He was not as easily swayed by flattery or beauty, but Ananya understood that every man had a weakness. In Richard's case, it was the longing for companionship and the desire to feel youthful again. She played her role carefully, appearing shy and reluctant to engage at first. That hesitation only fueled Richard's interest, making him feel like he was breaking through barriers rather than being manipulated. The relationship moved slower than her previous ones. Ananya knew she couldn't afford mistakes, not with rumors already swirling about her past. She reinvented herself once again, this time taking on the role of a woman focused on charity and social causes. She began appearing at fundraising events and community galas where she was photographed beside Richard. The image they projected was one of elegance and stability, a couple grounded in shared values. This carefully constructed facade quieted some of the doubts that had been growing around her, at least temporarily. Still, Richard's inner circle was suspicious. His business partners kept reminding him that his fortune had made him a target, while his adult children worried about Ananya's influence. To counter this, she worked on winning them over. She charmed Richard's daughter with gestures of kindness and offered to support his son's career ambitions. She wove herself into the fabric of his family, making it harder for anyone to dismiss her as a threat. The engagement, when it finally came, was quieter than her previous ones. Ananya insisted on a small ceremony, saying she wanted love to be celebrated without Richard was touched by her humility, not realizing it was a calculated move to draw less attention to their union. Once married, she began her financial maneuvering, subtly placing herself into Richard's real estate holdings, taking on the role of advisor and partner. Unlike before, she did not immediately shift money around. Instead, she manipulated contracts, deeds, and shares, slowly carving out a place for herself in his empire. But the pressure on her was greater this time. Investigators had begun reviewing David Reynolds' death more closely, and old details from Michael Turner's demise were Journalists started connecting dots, pointing out the chilling pattern of wealthy men dying after marrying the same woman. Richard himself began to sense unease, noticing small inconsistencies in Ananya's stories and financial dealings. Yet by the time doubts crept into his mind, he was already ensnared in her carefully built web. When Richard Hayes was found lifeless in his countryside estate, the cause was once again ruled accidental, but the similarities were impossible to ignore. 3 men, 3 sudden deaths, all linked to one woman. Ananya once again played the grieving widow, but this time the suspicion surrounding her was no longer background noise, it had become a storm. As Richard Hayes' funeral concluded, the whispers about Ananya Kapoor grew too loud to ignore. 3 wealthy men, all linked to her, had died under strange and sudden circumstances. The media dubbed her the Black Widow Bride, and investigators, who had once dismissed her cases as coincidences, began to revisit each death with sharper eyes. What stood out most was not the grief she displayed publicly, but the precision with which she handled their estates. Each time, she had secured assets, financial control, or a position of power in her husband's business ventures, leaving behind a trail of wealth that always seemed to flow in her direction. Detective Mark Sullivan was assigned to the case after pressure mounted from Richard's children and business associates. Unlike the earlier investigations, this one dug deeper, tracing Ananya's life before her move to the United States. They uncovered a hidden past in India, one filled with unresolved scandals and rumors of manipulation. There had been an engagement that ended abruptly under mysterious circumstances. With her suffering a financial collapse days after calling off the wedding, no charges were ever filed. But the similarities were enough to raise red flags. As Sullivan built his case, he pieced together a timeline that painted Ananya not as a grieving widow, but as a meticulous planner who had turned marriage into a deadly enterprise. Every relationship she entered followed a pattern: charm, control, financial entanglement, and then tragedy. Each husband's death had been ruled accidental, but when laid side by side, the similarities were chilling. David Reynolds drowning after an argument near a lake. Michael Turner's sudden heart failure despite no history of illness. And now Richard Hayes' fatal fall in his countryside home, all too neatly aligned. Investigators began digging into financial records, uncovering offshore accounts tied to shell companies in Ananya's name. The sums transferred after each death were staggering, collectively amounting to tens of millions. Her lifestyle, once explained as a product of her husband's fortunes, now looked more like the spoils of carefully orchestrated schemes. Even more alarming were the insurance policies she had quietly taken out, always just before disaster struck. As the case gained momentum, those who had once admired her beauty and poise now turned suspicious. Neighbors recalled small inconsistencies in her stories, while friends admitted they had been kept at a calculated distance. The image of a grieving, unlucky woman was unraveling, replaced by a portrait of someone cold, deliberate, and dangerously intelligent. For the first time, Ananya felt the walls closing in. She sensed the eyes on her, the shift in tone during questioning, the way people who once adored her now avoided her gaze. Yet instead of retreating, she began preparing for her next move. She knew that charm alone would no longer be enough to silence doubt. To stay ahead, she would need to reinvent herself once again, perhaps with a new identity, or an escape plan that could keep her one step ahead of the law. But Detective Sullivan was determined to stop her before she vanished. The evidence was mounting, and though no court had yet tied her directly to murder, the weight of suspicion was too heavy to ignore. What had once been whispered in hushed tones was now becoming a relentless pursuit of truth. Ananya's carefully constructed world of lies and deception was beginning to crack, and behind it was a darkness more terrifying than anyone could have imagined. The trial of Ananya Kapoor became a media spectacle, drawing crowds outside the courthouse and dominating headlines across continents. The glamorous young bride who had once graced society parties was now portrayed as a predator who turned love into a weapon. Prosecutors built their case carefully, laying out the deaths of David Reynolds, Michael Turner, and Richard Hayes, each described in haunting detail. The coincidences, once dismissed, now looked like threads in a sinister pattern. Financial documents, hidden insurance policies, and witness testimony painted a chilling portrait of a woman who had perfected deception. Inside the courtroom, Ananya remained calm, her dark eyes steady as the evidence was laid before her. She wore an air of composure that unsettled even the jury. To some, it seemed like arrogance, while others saw it as the final performance of someone who had built her entire life on acting. Her defense attorneys argued that she was simply a victim of circumstance, that her husbands had died tragically and naturally. They called her a grieving woman, hounded by suspicion and fueled by greed from those who wanted her wealth. Yet, with each passing day, the prosecution dismantled that narrative, showing emails, banking trails, and testimony that pointed directly to her calculated involvement. The most devastating moment came when a forensic toxicologist revealed traces of a rare sedative in Richard Hayes' system, one that could cause disorientation and falls if administered in small doses. Though subtle enough to evade earlier detection, new testing revealed its presence. The discovery tied her directly to Richard's death, and the courtroom gasped as the implications sank in. The image of accidents and coincidences collapsed instantly, replaced by the undeniable reality of murder. Still, Ananya did not falter. In her closing statement to the court, she spoke with haunting conviction, claiming she was being punished for her beauty, her ambition, and her refusal to be controlled by powerful men. She insisted she was the true victim, abandoned by fate and betrayed by those who feared her independence. Her words carried weight, and for a moment, the courtroom was silent, as if caught in her spell once again. But the evidence was stronger than her charm, and when the jury returned, the verdict was clear. Guilty of first-degree murder, guilty of fraud, guilty of conspiracy. The sentence was life in prison without parole. As the gavel struck, the illusion of the perfect bride shattered for good. Reporters rushed to capture her final moments of freedom as she was led away, hands cuffed, head held high. She did not weep, did not beg, and did not reveal remorse. Instead, she walked with the same confidence she had carried as society gave, as if she believed that even behind prison walls, she would find a way to reinvent herself once more. Outside, the families of her victims wept and embraced, their long fight for justice finally fulfilled. Yet even in victory, there was no sense of peace. The chilling reality remained that Ananya had thrived for years by exploiting trust, by turning affection into destruction. The trial may have ended, but the story of the Black Widow bride lingered, a warning carved into history. She had proven that beneath charm and beauty could lie something darker, something deadly, and something no one could ever truly see until it was too late.